So now I'm going to show you guys how we're going to paint our dragon eyes. Now that you've got it all Sharpied, we're going to go ahead and lay down some base colors. I've already put some colors on my palette. I think I'll start with the eye and then work out that way. I want to do orange for the eye first, so let's add a little bit of red to this yellow. And then for the eye, I'm going to start with a flat brush, because it's a fairly big area. And I'm going to start right on the edge. And I'm just going to paint all this in. It's okay if I overlap the pupil a little bit, because this part's going to be black. And black's a pretty opaque color, but I do not want to get my orange over the highlight, because the highlight right here is going to be white, and white is not really going to cover up the orange, because white tempera paint is not that opaque, meaning that it's a little more transparent, so you're going to be able to see the colors underneath. So when I'm going around the sections that I want to be white, I'm going to be really careful not to paint inside the line. You do want to be easy on the amount of paint you're getting, so I'm not putting a whole bunch of paint on my brush. I don't want it to be gloppy. And I'm kind of doing the edges first, because I can use the corner of the brush to kind of get a straight line. So we're just starting with a base color, because we will layer the darker colors on top of that. So I'm painting fairly thinly. Again, when you're trying to get by this white part, if you hold your brush up, you can get a cleaner edge and not go into your whites. Now I'm going to go ahead and with a round brush, a little bit smaller brush, and add this red around the edges. Again, I'm going to start with the edges first, so that I can be a little more controlled and get a cleaner edge. Again, you don't want your paintbrush to have too much paint on it, because then it'll go everywhere. So I'm just using the tip to get some paint on it. I'm painting very carefully around the edges. And so now that I have the edge done, I'm going to put some more paint on my brush and then go in and do these little pointy parts that are coming out. Now that I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and do the white of the eye. The white of the eye is never completely white. I'm cleaning out my brush really well with a paper towel. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of yellow to some white. And I'm adding yellow just because I did orange in the eye, so that will make it a little more unified. So it's still really light, almost white, but not quite. Now if I painted the iris, the color part of the eye, blue, I might have used a little blue in my white instead of yellow. Again, I just chose yellow because that matches with the colors I'm already using. And then we're gonna let that dry for a little bit. And I'm gonna clean off my brush, my flat brush, and I'm gonna start painting the scales around the eye. So I want to just do a base layer just to cover all the white first. So I'm gonna start with a light blue. That's the color I decided to go with. And I'm just gonna do the same I did with the inside of the eye and use my brush to go right up to these edges. Again, I'm not getting too much paint on my brush. I'm using light layers. And I just want to start with getting this edge. And if you have a little bit of a glop of paint on there, I start kind of further back to kind of get the gloppiness off of my paintbrush before I go right up to the edge. Because of the rest of that, I can spread out. And now that I have the edges done, I can paint a little bit faster for the rest of this, and I can get a little more paint on my brush because now I'm just gonna spread it out. So all I'm doing right now is just covering up the whites. So now that I have that covered, and this paint is dried a little bit, I'm gonna go in with my black and go ahead and paint the pupil. And now we're gonna go in and add the shadows and the highlights. This is one that I've already done. So now I'm gonna start working on these little shadows on the scales. Since I used a lighter blue, I'm gonna add a little bit of darker blue into that, and then just a little bit of black. And the trick here is to have a consistent placement of shadows. So what I mean by that is when I did this one, I decided all the shadows were going to be on the left hand side, and so that's where I put my shadows. You don't want to have it on the left hand side here and the right hand side here. That's going to make it look inconsistent. So I'm going to start with this big shape right here, and I'm just going to get a little bit of paint on my brush because what we want to use is a dry brush technique. So that I can just kind of blend it out this way. If you have too much paint on your brush, this is going to be really hard to do. So for the bigger shapes, I'm going to use a bigger paintbrush, my flat paintbrush. And it doesn't have to be super neat. Again, I'm not getting a whole lot of paint on my brush. I don't want my brush too wet. And when I get to these smaller shapes, that flat brush is a little too big. So I'm going to use a smaller brush. For the little shapes. So I would just continue doing that for the rest of the scales. Again, it's all about controlling the amount of paint that is on your brush. And even if you get too much paint and it's kind of gloppy, sometimes I even just take my finger and kind of spread it out a little bit. For the eye, but before I go into that, I'm going to make sure my brush is really clean. And to add these shadows, I'm just going to put a teeny tiny bit of black into this light yellow to kind of add a shadow. I don't like how gray that's looking, so I'm gonna add a little bit of red and some yellow just to make it a little warmer. And again, I'm having my brush be a little dry. I'm not putting a whole lot of paint on it. And that'll give me kind of a shadow to make my eye look a little bit more round and 3D. Then if I wanted to add highlights to this, I could by using a little bit of light blue and adding some white to it. And again, making sure my brush is fairly dry. And then I could add some highlights to my scale. Again, if you get too much, you can use your finger or paper towel to kind of blot it out. So you're basically just building up layers to add the shading and make it look more 3D. So I also went in after I did all the scales into all these spaces and added a darker blue with a little bit of black mixed in. So and then on the eye, I added some more darker orange to kind of give the eye a little bit of texture, the pupil. So you're going to just look at it, decide where you want the shadows, if you want to add highlights, and you're just going to build up those layers. Again, it's very important as you're doing this to have a brush that is not too wet with paint. So as you can see with both of these brushes, I never got paint way up here by this metal part, the ferrule. I only used paint on the tip of the brush.